Chapter 7. Death closes all, but something ere the end. Some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. Alfred Lord Tennyson, Ulysses. Larsen whirled. Light lanced toward him from the direction of the valleys. He cringed defensively. The magic struck Valvatnir and broke to streamers vivid as rockets. Yow! Larsen dropped flat to the ground. The valley seems to mock him, black as moonless night, yet somewhere in the gloom stalked a sorcerer more dangerous than any sniper. Is it Loki? Yes, Vidar confirmed. Look up, and lift your sword, or I won't be able to shield you from his spells. Pressed tight to the dirt out of habit, Larsen raised his eyes. Reddish light hovered on a crag above Sog's valley. In its center, Loki gestured, menacing as a demon in a fire pit. His sorcery streaked toward Larsen with a roar like thunder. Larsen rolled aside. Enchantment swirled into a fizzling whirlwind and funneled into Valvatnir's blade. How? Vidar's presence seemed weak in Larsen's mind. Not certain. Some aspect of Loki's imprisonment spell renders me capable of negating his other magics. Vidar's reply came, labored as a winded asthmatic. But it requires concentration. Larsen rose to a crouch, seeking cover. On the cliff face, light flared around Loki, brief and glorious as a dying star. Larsen squinted against its brilliance. Red and green shadows winked on the inside of his eyelids. When he recovered his vision, Loki was gone. Where is he? Damn it, where is he? Larsen spun like a dancer, sword pressed to his chest in a position more appropriate for a gun. Be still, Vidar chastised, but his tone betrayed fear. Between Sog's valley and Larsen's sorceries blazed. He raised Valvatnir offensively, shielding his eyes as light billowed to agonizing intensity, a mocking column of white flame. The enchantments broke suddenly to traces. Ahead, Loki appeared, sword readied beneath his fading magics. Larsen felt Vidar poised to fight enchantments. Loki lunged forward, Larsen blocked. The blades met in a shower of glittering sparks. Impact jarred Larsen to the elbow. He staggered backward, recovering just in time to block a second strike. The force of Loki's blow drove Larsen nearly to his knees. Loki's assault seemed ceaseless. His strokes came fast and were rhythmically competent. They left Larsen no opening for anything but awkward blocks and retreat. The god's face pinched in concentration. Yet, despite Larsen's obvious inexperience, Loki treated his opponent like a worthy threat. He displayed none of Brahman's assuredness. Loki knew overconfidence contrives incompetence. Larsen defended as well as he could, but his efforts seemed woefully inadequate. Loki's sword bit rents in his tunic and skin. Any one of the god's maneuvers could easily have taken Larsen's life, but Loki's strategy soon became obvious. He would drive wielder and god sword into the Hellspring together, obviating the need to handle Valvatnir himself, and Larsen was helpless to prevent him. Loki's sword wove a wall of steel, herding Larsen toward Helvelgamr as a shepherd does an errant sheep. The sharp nicks of his enemy's blade reawakened to throbbing pains left from Larsen's fight with Brahman. Tortured sinews screamed with every movement. His face felt as if it were on fire. He tried to stand firm against Loki's hammering blows, but his body could no longer obey. Blow after blow rang against Valvatnir. Larsen's ears buzzed, then roared. Ice shards prickled the back of his neck. The cold made him realize, with sudden terror, that the noises in his head did not come from within. Loki had driven him to the verge of Helvelgamr's pit. Christ! Larsen dredged deep for reserves of energy. Strength flowed back into his limbs. But the effort of blocking Loki's strokes drained his second wind almost instantly. Fatigue obscured Larsen's vision to a blur. Sweat stung the many scratches inflicted by Loki. Scarcely able to lift his arms, Larsen could only retreat and let Valvatnir tend defense. Loki bore in. Larsen recoiled. The ground fell out beneath his heel. Near panic, he staggered away from the ledge and nearly impaled himself on Loki's blade. Hope shattered beneath a wild explosion of despair. What the hell am I fighting for anyway? Vidar's reply seemed weak, as if the efforts of defense cost him as much as Larsen. Loved ones, Alarum. The future, my freedom, and liberty and justice for all. Loki's eyes glittered violet blue as gemstones. He drew back his arm for the final lunge. Loved ones, Vidar? Larsen's thoughts grew bitter. Sylm's dead. She's dead by my own hand. Sylma's dead. Whose cause? Vidar jerked upward to block. Her cause, and the cause of all men in the future. Larsen stood. ready to accept the death promised by Loki's descending sword. The fate giantess Skuld claimed freeing you would doom my people. Vidar's mental presence went oddly silent. Loki lanced forward. Larsen demanded an answer. Vidar! Galanar! Vidar's cry echoed through Larsen's consciousness. Hope displaced futility in a corner of his mind. A shuriken skinned through the air, visible only as a glint from a sun ray. It embedded in Loki's sword hand with a nearly inaudible thunk. Loki uttered a startled oath. Rather than drop his sword, he pulled his thrust. Holding his blade between Larsen and himself, Loki twisted toward his new antagonist. Magics crackled from his outstretched left hand and sheeted toward Kensi Galanar. No! Concerned for Galanar's life, Larsen struck. His upstroke crashed into Loki's armpit and bit through muscle. Loki screamed. The shuriken dislodged from his hand, flicking blood across Larsen's foot. Of itself, Valvatnir jerked downward, severing the tendon behind Loki's knee. Loki fell. Unable to use his right arm to catch himself, he dropped, face first, in the mud. Larsen pressed Valvatnir's point to the back of his neck. The trickster howled his frustration. Wait! Loki's high-pitched voice betrayed fear. Hatred, exhaustion, and grief warred within Larsen, warping intellect in a gray haze of confusion. Despite his frightened quality, Loki's command held an inviolate authority. Larsen paused. Loki continued quickly. If you kill me, you destroy your own world. Loki's voice inspired violent hatred in Larsen, for this god who had twisted Silm's half-brother into a vindictive demon and designed the ruin of gods and men. Abhorrence flared toward the god whose ugly daughter possessed Silm's soul. Die, you scum! He arched Valvatnir to gain momentum. The blade leaped hungrily for Loki's neck. Loki loosed a cry, half sob and half scream. Your mother's blood is on your hands! Inches from Loki, Larsen pulled his blow. The accusation seared like a hot knife, but he dared not display weakness before the trickster. Explain, was all he trusted himself to say. Vidar's presence intervened, weaker than a whisper. Caution alarum. He'll trap you too. Larsen pressed Valvatnir tighter to Loki's neck. Though the sword fought Larsen's restraint, he forced it steady. A second mental being poked gently into Larsen's mind, more powerful than the first and as beautiful as the god at his mercy. If you slay me, no one will contest Odin. The Norse pantheon will endure, supreme through eternity. Christianity can never reign. Al Larsen, if you kill me, your world, your family, and the people you loved will never exist. Never exist. Never exist. The last phrase reverberated through Larsen's mind, and no original thought replaced it. Loki's mental essence reached for a memory. No! Vidar blocked Loki like a physical entity. You can't stop me. Loki's far stronger presence thrust Vidar aside effortlessly. Larsen remained motionless, his eyes fixed on Galanar, who struggled to his feet, still dazed by Loki's magics. The sky seemed to open. Sunlight streamed through the clouds, accompanied by the moist heat of a New Hampshire summer. Helvelgrimr's roar became the crackle of a campfire. The mingled reek of mold and death transformed to the lighter aroma of pine. Larsen watched himself with the detachment of a movie. He was 12 years old. Al! The familiar voice of his father rose over the rustle of grasses in the wind. Let your sister tend the fire. You've got more important things to do. I promised you'd teach your brother to fly his kite. Larsen felt his heart quicken at the sound of his father's voice. He watched himself trot across a plain of weeds to where his father stood beside his little brother Timmy. Spectator to his own memory, Larsen examined his father with a stranger's eye. Carl Larsen was a large man, powerful, yet gentle. His close-cropped blond hair had a tendency to stand on end, giving him an air of harshness, but his soft blue eyes betrayed him. The vivid vision of the dead father he loved brought tears to Larsen's eyes. Instantly, the scene changed. Larsen saw his mother kneeling beside the dented fender of his father's brand-new Plymouth. Tears blurred her pale eyes, and drew crooked lines through the blush on her cheeks. It took Larsen several seconds to recognize the child at her side, himself at age 5, torn by his mother's sorrow. He remembered the scene well. Planning to take the Plymouth for his first test drive, Cindy Larsen had backed the car into the garage wall. Tell him I did it, Al Larsen told his frightened mother. The ridiculousness of his suggestion made her laugh through her tears. She hugged him to her chest, and Larsen reveled in the memory of her warmth and the touch of her lips against his forehead. Mom! Images dimmed, crumbled, and reformed in a different sequence. He heard his father's cheers, mixed with the goading cries of other parents. A soccer ball wafted toward Larson's knee. Twisting sideways, he stopped the ball's momentum with his calf, dribbled several paces forward, and kicked the pass to the right wing. A crowd of players overran Larson's position at fullback. As the ball reversed direction, they turned and raced after it. The shrill of a whistle called the first half to its conclusion. Larson took his turn at the water bottle and sat on the bench. His closest friend, soccer hero Tom Jeffers, dropped to the seat at his side. "Nice block, Larson." Larson combed hair from his eyes with his fingers. "Thanks, TJ. You're doing pretty good yourself. Think we'll catch him in the second half?" "Think?" Jeffers winked at a girl on the sidelines. "I know it, man. I'll put in a couple shots. You just keep them scoreless." Larson watched the girl blush and turn away, slightly jealous of his friend's rugged good looks. "Talk to the goalie. I can't make a promise like that." Jeffers met Larson's stare, and the center forward's face waxed pensive. "I got a promise for you. Keep them scoreless next half, and I'll get you a date for the prom with my sister." "Terry?" Larson's voice rose in surprise and excitement. He cleared his throat and continued at his normal octave. "You serious?" Jeffers laughed. "Yeah, sure. Just play that defense. I want to win this one." "Yeah, sure." Larson's mind tugged from the game to a picture of Terry Jeffers. Long-legged, dark-haired, blue-eyed Terry Jeffers could find her own share of dates, and he never possessed the courage to ask her. Jeffers's voice and his heavy hand clamped to Larson's shoulder pulled the fullback from his reverie. "So, what are you doing after graduation?" "I don't know. College, I think. What about you?" Jeffers started toward center field. "I'm joining the Army. Going to Vietnam to become a war hero." Larson's memory broke with jarring abruptness. He felt his consciousness jolted to the path of a different recollection. It was the summer after his high school graduation. Seeking spending money for college, he found a job working as a day camp counselor. The pay was comparatively high for employment of its type, and the benefits undeniable. Camp Collinswood had 2 pools, 4 athletic fields, 16 tennis courts, and 50 wooded acres. Yet despite the many facilities, the boys in Larson's group preferred a game which required no special equipment. Standing with his assistant before a dozen rowdy 7- and 8-year-old boys, Larson heard himself ask, "What do you guys want to do now?" "Kill the counselor," they chanted nearly in unison. A wave of small bodies converged on Larson and his assistant. Resigned to the punches and prods of children too young to inflict significant pain, Larson alternated between feigned defenselessness and throws which sprawled the campers in giggling heaps. He passed off wrestling moves as karate throws, or tricks from his days of alligator tussling and dinosaur hunting. "Al's got a girlfriend, Al's got a girlfriend," one of the youngsters chanted teasingly. Larson rose, dumping 2 boys from his back. Terry Jeffers stood several feet from the game. Her drab-colored dress was rumpled, and her hands knotted together at her waist. As he drew closer, Larson noticed her eyes, red and swollen, hollowed by anguish. "Terry?" he started uncertainly. "Al," her voice was a tenuous quaver. "It's—" The scene shattered with Loki's muttered curse. Larson's thoughts jumped to his prom with the disquieting transition of a scratched record. Terry wore a gown of blue satin. Dark hair haloed her face in burnished waves. Eyeshadow and mascara focused attention on the sapphire depths of her eyes. Breathless, Larson stared, but his thoughts drifted back toward the unfinished sentence of his previous memory. Somehow, Larson knew Terry's message was extremely important. Loki's presence nudged Larson back toward his vision of Terry Jeffers before the prom. Each line in the petals of her corsage blossomed into vivid focus. Satin swirled about her slender hips. "Damn you, trickster!" Badar shoved Larson's memories askew as the gods circled the flawed and tangled circuitry of his mind with the caution of dancers on a bed of needles. Terry's dress went black as death, her head buried in her hands. Loki snarled. Larson felt sanity slide beneath a wash of terror. He danced to a slow ballad. Terry's head rested against his shoulder. His sweating palms left marks in the fine blue satin of her dress. But the feeling was all wrong. The music muted to the heavy toll of bells, chilling harmony to the anguished sobs of Mrs. Jeffers. Terry stared at a closed coffin, and Larson remembered. TJ died in Vietnam. Rationality broke beyond control of the sparring gods. Thoughts merged in a disharmonic orchestra of memory. Lights flashed as one, the cold yellow of porch light, the glaring red-orange of mortars, the multi-hued explosions of sorceries. Larson felt alternately hot as fire and cold as death, Grief and hatred, sorrow and vengeance, self-pity and empathy swirled to a numbing, incomprehensible mix of emotion which tore screams from his throat. Larson froze, listening to the echoes of his own pained cries. Gradually, sanity drew his crumbled thoughts together like pieces of a puzzle. It was all a lie, a world of men who sought honesty and falsehoods and war in the name of peace. They preached turn the other cheek and practiced kill or be killed. We believed in death for freedom and honor, yet dismembered the dead without respect. I've seen too much fear and not enough glory, a single God who promised forgiveness and banished his children to hellish tortures for their doubts and uncertainties. My country trained its babies to kill, then condemned them as murderers. Larson. Loki's plea jerked Larson back to the present. Galinar stood watching, his eyes dark with concern. Again, Larson rayed Valvetnir, its steel a dull gray shadow in the mist. His arm rose and fell. The blade sheared through Loki's back. The god's death justified by the lives of the innocent, the unborn casualties of future wars. And Larson wept for the other casualties, men and women whose existence became nothing more substantial than his memories of them. His own existence became a paradox, a life from a future which was no longer reality. Vidar's mental presence whispered softer than wind, "I'm sorry." The word struck Larson like a physical blow. He stared at the sword in his fist. Fresh blood trickled from its haft to stain his fingers scarlet. It was all another lie. Despite the utter destruction Larson wreaked upon his own world, Vidar remained imprisoned in the sword. "Damn your evil heart!" Larson jumped to his feet and hurled Valvetnir. The sword flipped end over end, glittering as it passed beneath tears in the clouds. "Damn all gods and men! You forced my hand against everything I loved in both worlds!" Turning his back on the sword, which had served as his companion for weeks in a strange land, Larson staggered several paces. He collapsed at Selm's side. Her flesh was cold to his touch. Her lids remained closed, as if in sleep. Tears poured from Larson's eyes, like a miniature replica of Havelgamer's Falls. Larson watched Galinar move through a grief-inspired haze, which gave all reality the consistency of dream. Respectfully, the Kensi averted his eyes from Larson's tears. He trotted forward and seized the blooded hellsword which still lay beside Brahman's soulless body. "You stand for everything I despise, and against everything I believe." Galinar's voice sounded strangely solid in the lingering silence which followed Larson's mental battle. Several seconds passed before Larson realized his teacher addressed the sword. Larson heard no reply, but the sword shimmered in Galinar's hand and its form blurred. Numbly, he watched the Kensi carry the blade to Havelgamer's chasm and set it, point first, at the edge of the falls. Sound rose from the warped sword shape, scarcely loud enough to rise above the water's roar. "Back, mortal fool! You've no right to challenge gods!" The shifting mists before Galinar revealed a vague man form. Shock weakened Larson's grasp, and Selm's body slipped to the ground. Kensi Galinar cleared his throat. "God or man, Helblindi, you've no right to take glory from a warrior's battles. You're a tool of chaos and evil, a being with no reason to live." Helblindi's figure sharpened to clarity. Though golden-haired and fair-skinned as Loki, Helblindi displayed none of his brother's beauty. "Men, not gods or tools, mortal. Your weaknesses shall become my strengths. You're a toy, swordsman. I'll crush you with your own flaws." The bitterness and power in the god's voice made Larson flinch, but Galinar stood steady as the land itself. "I have no flaws. Ask Alarum." Galinar's foot lanced toward the god faster than thought. The blow crashed into Helblindi's gut. Off balance, the god fell, twisting and screaming into the cascade. Galinar completed his statement in a triumphant whisper. "I'm no hero." Awe nearly deafened Larson to a noise from behind. Even as he whirled, he knew what he would find. The spell which had imprisoned Helblindi in a sword was the same which held Vidar. As promised by the fates, Loki's death did break his enchantments. They just took time to fade. Larson recognized Vidar from mental images and the broken reality of Vietnam. Though freed, the god still addressed him telepathically, but now Vidar's actual presence was undetectable in his mind. "I owe you, Alarum. Ask what you wish. If it is within my power, it is yours." Larson did not hesitate for consideration. "Silm!" Vidar's face looked stricken. "Alarum, I'm sorry. I want her back as much as you do. If you had used any other sword—" What little strength remained to Larson dispersed. He turned away. "There is something I can do." Larsen heard nothing. He cradled Selm's body like a doll. Both his lost world and the one he had come to save seemed faded and distant as childhood dreams. Vidar's presence materialized in his mind. The god enfolded his charge, flicking consciousness to peace, and Larsen dropped into a twilight sleep. While Larsen lay, anesthetized by Vidar's powers, the god set to his task. Larsen's mind pattern stretched before him like a roadmap designed by a maniac. Vidar sighed without bitterness. With the tenderness of a father with his child, he sliced blind loops and alleys. His will forced coiled paths straight, broke unrelated connections, reaffixed the frayed thought waves which allowed Brahman and Loki to torture Larsen with memory. Vidar's work continued well into the afternoon. The god mended all the flaws his capabilities allowed, deleting only those ideas which Larsen found intolerable. He left the recollections of Vietnam, TJ's funeral, and Larsen's own death, along with happier ones of his parents and Terry in her prom dress. Though painful, they belonged to Larsen and had their role in shaping his personality. Vidar had no wish to change his savior, only to restore the sanity which was his by right of birth. As the last of the tortuous pathways assumed its proper place, Vidar withdrew to assess his work with pride. He retreated from Larsen's mind, leaving a final message of hope and peace, a promise of future happiness and pain in a world with elves, dwarves, gods, and magic. Then Vidar disappeared for Asgard, mentally and physically, leaving Larsen with little or no understanding of his reward. Farewell, Alarum. Epilogue. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. Arthur Schopenhauer, Studies in Pessimism. Still dazed, Larsen watched Galinar examine the long row of weapons spread before him on the dirt. A half-dozen steel shurikens weathered Dickensi's gaze. Each sharpened corner underwent and passed the test of Galinar's thumbnail, and he dropped the shurikens in the grass. Next, the swordmaster turned his attention to a silver chain, tipped at both ends by a 5-inch spike. Every link met Galinar's intense scrutiny before the Kensi set the Manriki Gusari aside with the same satisfaction. Stung by Galinar's insensitive disregard for the 3 corpses and for his own sorrow, Larsen abandoned Selm's body and moved toward the Kensi. Galinar looked up briefly, smiled a greeting, and returned his attention to an instrument which resembled a large tuning fork with unequal blades. This too the Kensi set aside. He reached for a dagger, unsheathed it, frowned, and wiped a spot on the blade with his cloak. With a toss of his head, he set the edge of the steel to his whetstone and scraped. Annoyance rose on Larsen. He waited for his teacher to speak. Galinar said nothing. He nodded approval at the knife, sheathed it, and placed it with his other weapons. Katana and Shoto soon joined his arsenal, along with a small knife which slid from a position in the katana's sheath. Larsen had not previously noticed it. Galinar hefted a short metal band and flared it into a fan with recklessly sharp edges. Larsen's discomfort exploded into anger. "You inhuman bastard!" Galinar looked up. Larsen paced furiously. "How can you sit there prissing and preening while Sim lies there dead? You're wrong. You do have flaws. You're not a man. You're an insensitive beast, a stone without feelings. Sim is dead. Can't you understand that? Can't you even cry?" Grief crushed wrath, and Larsen was overcome by a fresh bout of tears. "Damn you!" Galinar made no reply. A deft flick of his wrist closed the fan. Slowly, he reached for his arsenal. He tied the Manriki Kusari around his waist, beneath the wide sash. The swords and dagger regained their places at his sides. He stuffed the Hachiwari in his belt, behind the katana. The metal fan disappeared beneath his cloak. Carefully, Kensi Galinar set to work, arranging each shuriken in its proper position in his arm sheath. Each moment of silence jabbed Larsen like a knife. He cursed to Kensi in Old Norse, switched to English as he expended his repertoire of insults, then finished in the Vietnamese version of American. Galinar seemed to take no notice. He finished his housekeeping efficiently, patted the hilt of his katana, and finally turned his attention to his raving companion. "You coming?" Larsen bit his lip, having exhausted his supply of oaths, blasphemies, and affronts. "Where?" was all he managed to say. Galinar studied the foaming hybrid of waters which formed the falls of Hvalgrimr. "To hell. I'm bringing Sim back." Larsen's eyes widened, his nostrils flared. He found himself utterly incapable of speech. Galinar continued, "In the chasm, beyond the Hell Spring, is a bridge which leads to hell." Larson found his tongue. You're crazy. Vidar said he couldn't. Galinar interrupted, his stare distant. Vidar is only a god. Together, we've already killed 2. Helblindi without even a weapon. There's only 1 left. His gaze met Larson's, and the elf looked away. Galinar's tone went grim. Alarum, you made a promise to Silm. You vowed that if this quest dooms the 2 of you to separate worlds, you would find her. But that was when I thought, began Larson in defense. Galinar waved him silent. You think too much. I'm going after her. Are you coming? Larson chewed his lower lip and turned away. He heard the rustle of grasses as Galinar walked toward the narrow path into Hvalgamir's valley. Gods! Larson approached Loki's body, examining the dark blood which had clotted around his fatal stroke. Even for the remote possibility of retrieving Silm's soul, I can't face another god. Can I? The rush of cascading waters and the howl of wind were his only answers. Galinar's golden figure marched on toward Hell's pathway. Gritting his teeth against what he might see, Larson rolled Loki's body to its back. The god's face seemed as handsome in death as in life. His oddly colored eyes still glimmered. Goodbye, noble foe, said Larson softly. He caught Loki's rigid arm and flipped the body into the hell spray. Loki tumbled limply through the surge of intertwined rivers, and was soon lost beneath the boiling current of white water. Larson caught up Loki's sword and scrambled after the Kensi. Galinar stopped as Larson approached. He waited until the elf drew to his side. Yeah, Larson said softly. I'm coming. They turned toward the narrow pathway together. For some distance, man and elf picked their way down the incline in silence. Larson paused a moment in thought, then confronted his companion. Galinar. While we're at it, can we free Brender too? Kensi Galinar's smile was slight but unmistakable. His arm pressed to Larson's shoulder. Sure, hero. You can only die once. This has been a Nightfall Audiobooks production of The Bifrost Guardians, Book 1, Godslayer, by Mickey Zucker Reichert. Hi, this is Chris again with Nightfall Audiobooks, and thank you very much for joining me for my production of The Bifrost Guardians, Book 1, Godslayer, by Mickey Zucker Reichert. I haven't read this in about 20 years. Like, seriously. It's been that long. I had forgotten a lot about it. The imagery that occurs when Vidar is showing Al Larson the final battle, Ragnarok, and what will happen if he doesn't free Vidar from Valvetnir, and you have the man and the woman retreating and finding shelter in a pine, and that is the basis of Adam and Eve in Christianity. That was such a strong image, and it really stuck with me when I read this the first time. But I was confused, and I thought that that imagery had occurred in, like, Book 5, way after Ragnarok occurred. So this is great. This is a lot of fun. You don't get as much fish-out-of-water stuff as I had hoped. I know more of that stuff comes later. But this novel ends perfectly. Larson and Silm fall in love. They acknowledge that. Unfortunately, Brender dies. They get to Hvalgamir. They kill Loki. They kill Brahmin. Silm dies. And Vidar repairs Larson's torn and shattered mind. And then when Larson wakes up, Galinar is doing the usual gearing up and getting ready to go into combat. And he goes, I'm going into hell to get Silm. You made a promise. Are you coming with? Holy crap. What a strong ending. It perfectly sets up the second novel. So you can imagine my irritation when you have the omnibus in your hands and you read that and you're like, oh man, I can't wait for book 2. And then it says, note to the reader, the astute reader will realize that the world of the Shadow Climber corresponds to an area of ancient Germany across the sea from the old Scandinavia where Godslayer was set. What? What is this? Book 2 is called Shadow Climber, an area of ancient Germany across the sea from the old Scandinavia where Godslayer was set. The historical and geographical inaccuracies are purely intentional. They are explained painlessly in subsequent volumes. The sequel, Dragon Rank Master, continues the adventure of Al Larson, as well as those of some of the people from this novel. You're telling me that the Bifrost Guardians Book 2 has nothing at all to do with Al Larson and Galinar and their quest to go free Silm? Yeah. And that's why I don't like Book 2 at all. because you finish book 1 on this extraordinarily high note, and then you have to read another novel about a character you don't care about, and then you finally hit book 3, and the Shadow Climber characters meet up with the Godslayer characters, and then, only then, can you finally continue on your quest to go find Silm. I don't like that at all. I guess we really needed those Shadow Climber characters to be in the Godslayer world for the Bifrost Guardians, and they do come in handy later. I don't know. I'm not an author here. I just read the material. I just didn't like that at all. It totally turned me off from this entire series, but once you read Shadow Climber, you get through it, you hit Dragon Rank Master, and then you find the other 2 books. There is your entire series of novels. I will finish this series. Do I recommend this series? Absolutely. I positively do. I am biased against Shadow Climber because of the reasons I stated. I don't really care for it as a story at all. I really enjoy Al Larson and Galinar and Silm and their escapades, and I sign up for this series to read it for those characters alone and not really to Zir and Astrid. This is excellent fantasy. It has everything that you want. Even dragons, gods, magic. What more do you need? The flashbacks are a little annoying and very, very hard to convey properly in audio form. I hope I did a really good job. The voices in this novel got away from me too. I really, really tried to keep Brahmin and Loki separate when they were in the same room together. It got away from me again. I don't have any time to go back and fix that. I apologize. I'm doing what I can do. It is what it is. Larson, Silm, and Galinar, and Brender are very clearly defined, and I'm very proud of their performances. I do plan entirely on finishing this series. I am taking a break. I cannot wait to get back to Fear Street, get back to reading more of those novels, because this has taken me quite a while to do. This has been like 3 weeks reading this novel. It was that big, and I had that precious amount of time to work on it. So I hope that you enjoyed it. So what should I do next? I don't know. Please write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I love seeing your emails. Please write to me. I'll write you back. I don't just see it and not respond. I'm also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. You have no idea how much I enjoy reading your comments and interacting with everybody. They're a lot of fun. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. Any help will be greatly appreciated. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me narrate to them stories from 20 years ago or more. So thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.